This is now my third video post-release of Thrice Upon a Time, and the final one with my thoughts and impressions about the film. My first one being a spoiler-free review that I posted the day of release, and the second one a live stream a few days later in which I went over it with the chat to hear from all of you, because I think it's important to know how everyone feels about it. Now this was originally intended to be the second video, the one in between, and I did write a script for it, but I wasn't convinced by it, mostly because I was justifying things that I felt strongly about just because of my admiration for the work of Hideaki Anno, and using him as an excuse. It felt cheap, and I sounded like a delusional fanboy. Thus, I decided to watch the movie a few more times, as much as necessary, to be sure on how did I feel about the movie. And I watched it and rewatched it, until all my doubts were clear on that matter. Because everything that I'm going to say on this video are my legit feelings about the film, and my opinion on these topics won't change in a long time. I know that I'm super late posting a spoiler review video for a movie that was released over a week ago, but it was important to me that I could be totally honest to the audience of this channel, and now I'm prepared to transmit it to you guys. I am not going to repeat myself in this video about things that I already covered on my spoiler-free review, so I encourage you to watch that video also, as it does have some things that I'm not going to go over yet again on this video. But there are other things that I will go over again just to reinforce my arguments. In exchange for the super late video, I will be dropping in a couple of analyses as a reward for your patience. But I want to be clear that this is not by any means an in-depth explanatory video, so don't expect it to be. With that being said, let's begin. We all know this is the last part of a 4-part story, and the movie starts off by reminding us about the events of those stories. The first movie was basically a reanimated version of the first 6 episodes of the TV anime. It worked to introduce the story again and as a nostalgia fest for the oldest of EVA fans. The second movie took even more risks than the first one, and some notable changes to the original storyline started to happen. Now, in my opinion, and it's not a secret, I have said many times before, this is the weakest of the 4 movies. That wasn't my opinion when released though. Back then, I loved this movie, because now we were getting a different story with strong influence from the original one. And I remember back then saying to myself that this is exactly what I was expecting from this new project. Something unique, but that still felt familiar. Now looking back after watching Q, I realized that the second movie was going to be the weakest one. And now, after watching 3+1, I can reassess that. Q was a very different product, a completely different story. That even if it has its problems, like telling the story exclusively from Shinji's perspective, overall it felt refreshing and new, especially bringing it to co-star the movie one of the most iconic characters of the story, Kaoru, who never got a proper character development in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and finally Anno gave it one. Other than taking exclusively Shinji's perspective, other major flaws of the film included a time skip and a convoluted climax with huge info dumps. I wasn't bothered back then about the lack of screen time from Misato and Asuka, but I was particularly concerned about the Mari situation, after 2 movie appearances without an arc. But I thought that 3+1 was going to be fair with all of these characters, as Kaoru got the 3rd movie and Rei was prominent in the first one and the second one. So, as you can see, I was expecting a lot coming into this film. If that wasn't enough, Thrice Upon a Time had to compete directly against the other endings, in particularly the end of Evangelion. As for the definite ending to the story will be part in countless discussions over the next decade, especially regarding on which was the better ending. Now this is unfair, you will say, and you're absolutely right, but it is how it is. Also, didn't help out that the movie used a lot of nostalgia putting in iconic moments from that movie, so Kara put itself in a very tough spot. Many times Hideaki Anno said that Neon Genesis Evangelion was a story made for Japanese audiences. And if he would ought to know back then that the show was going to be aired internationally and become the hit that it is, then he would have altered some things like the religious connotations. You can see that in Reveal. There are still a ton of religious connotations though. but others were replaced with more historical and less controversial themes. As it is obvious how this film in particular, and the new theatrical edition in general, were aimed to an international market, adapting the story from a very dark one to a brighter one. For years, the movies didn't appear on streaming services, but now all of a sudden, all of them are in one of the most popular ones, Amazon, and this will work to introduce the story once again to a new generation of Even fans, as happened with Netflix a few years back with the original Neon Genesis Evangelion story. It feels to me that at the end of the day, this move by Amazon will benefit Netflix also. As for people that haven't seen the original story, but just the new one, will want to jump to Netflix to check it out. This movie also had a ton, and I mean a ton, of references to Sadamoto's manga. To the point that I had to go over the manga again and spend few hours on it, especially in the latest chapters. This was painful as for the manga is not my favorite Evangelion story. But going after the movie so many times, it became clearer and clearer the strong influence that the manga, to the point that I thought I was going insane. That doesn't mean that those references play exactly the same though, but I will go over them later on this video. The overall feeling that this movie left to me is that many people at Kara got a saying on how it was going to play out. Which means that this is not entirely a Hideaki Anno story, because it doesn't feel entirely like it. The best example of it that I can provide is episode 4 in Neon Genesis Evangelion. That is the episode in which Shinji leaves NERV for the first time, and ends with Misato and Shinji looking to one another in a long quiet scene. That is one of the most unpopular and worst episodes of the show, but it's also the only one that wasn't written by Hideaki Anno, but by Akio Satsukawa, one of the Evangelion writers. Now, to be fair on Satsukawa, he also co-wrote the very popular episodes 6, 9, 15, 19, and 24 among others. My point being is that some parts of this film felt like episode 4. It just doesn't feel right to me, and that hurt the pacing of the film. Furthermore, Hideaki Anno nowadays is a very different man from who he was in the 90s, when the original show was being produced. Nowadays, Anno is a happy man, and his work has always been a reflection on his feelings and experiences. Thus, this is a fact that also influenced some of the artistic and plot choices in Thrice Upon a Time. The movie is divided overall in 5 parts. We have a prologue, which is the Paris sequence, followed by a traditional 3-act structure, being this the village, the wonder, and the additional impact, by finally end with an epilogue, which is the very confusing ending that I will go over also later in this video. All of these acts are divided very clearly, as for we basically move from one location to another. So the transitional changes are very obvious, and the pacing gets hurt as a result. Nevertheless, the fluency of the story within the act itself runs pretty smoothly, and sometimes are used to highlight a point in the story as a whole. As an example, the very clever transition in the second act, in which Asuka and Mari are discussing Shinji, and Asuka says that the boy doesn't need a lover, but a mother, and then we directly cut to Misato. Very clever indeed. I have to recognize that I was laughing hard on how clever and hilarious that was. In contrast, a breaking on the pacing is when we transition from the village to the wonder. Let's talk about the village first, which is the act that, although cute, and I emphasize cute because I don't consider it to be beautiful, is the act that more problems has in my opinion. The first act is always very important because screenwriters are setting the mood for the story, also in which the main characters of the story are going to have their arcs developed, and a visual description on the world in which the story is going to play out is put in place. In the movie, we are being told an idea of hope for survival, to see another day of an uncertain future. But every day in the village looks like an average day in the real world. That's the overall feeling of it, to the point that they have to force a sequence in which Kensuke takes Shinji to see the failures of Infinity rising and walking around directionless like the zombies from The Walking Dead, only to be sold on the idea that this village was under constant threat. That is the only sequence in which we, as an audience, are shown a possible threat in the 40 minutes we spent there. The act felt more like a subplot of a second act, to be honest, because by the end of the movie we will discover that the ultimate motivation of our hero was to build a different world, one without Evas. Then we jump to the wonder, which is the second act. Now, this act, as an act, plays out perfectly. We have most of our main characters together for the first time, we have their arcs start being developed accordingly, and now we are in the real world. The world that we know exists in Eva. Also, and very importantly, the mood is set to the one that we are going to have for most of the movie. It feels to me that the whole first act was way too long. Should have been shorter and moved for some time in the second act. And in the first act, have the children reach directly to the wonder, where the idea of hope runs out more realistically, and play most of the second act in the first one instead, with some story changes due to the established timeline. I think it would have played out better. Also by giving Reikyu and Shinji more time to breathe and relate to each other under Wily and Misato, and then have Rei die in the village. Would have played better than it did on the film. But that's only my opinion. Let's leave the technical aspects of the film behind and put the focus on the characters and the plot. I already addressed Shinji on my last video, in which I said that for me, he's the strongest character on the film, and the best version of Shinji I ever seen. Now, I am going to try to avoid talking on Anno's self-insertion into the story as Shinji the character, just because it's too boring at this point to tell you the truth, and I already made several videos assessing that, so right now, it should be very clear to everyone. I mean, we all know that already, and I know that you know that. Instead, I am going to break down Shinji as a character in this movie. He starts as the Shinji we all know, sobbing his way into the village. He's almost catatonic due to Kaoru's death in the previous film, which plays out almost identical to the end of Evangelion. Shinji just doesn't care anymore. Now, I always loved seeing my heroes in their lowest point and darkest hours because there is where character as a feature is forged. Never liked those heroes that are way too OP coming into the story or almost perfect heroes. For me, the hero of the story has to be crawling in the mud and then rise to their better versions. And that is exactly what happens to Shinji in this story. That being said, I am going into many things that I didn't like and a particular one that I hated. So this is going to turn very negative for the next few minutes, bear that in mind. In the village we are introduced to the older version of Toji, Kensuke and Hikari, which is probably the worst kept secret ever. We already knew about 5 years ago that they were going to be in the movie, and they are basically used as a mix of fan service and plot devices, being Kensuke the only exception. Well, kinda. We are going to talk more about Ken when I go over Asuka. So Toji is this village physician that is very happy with how things are going and constantly presents a positive figure for both the village itself and Shinji. Shinji, however, doesn't show any reactions with the first interactions with the character, which I totally believe because that relationship wasn't developed at all in the previous movies. But we are trying to be sold the idea that this will spark some type of nostalgia in Shinji that will ultimately make him react. Well, he doesn't. So the whole Toji character for me was a waste in the entire new theatrical edition. That, by the way, we are never told how his shirt ended up in Nerf and worn by Shinji in the previous film, so there's a plot hole right there. Hikari, now his wife and a mother of a newborn, is more relevant, especially to raise fish out of the water storyline. But that's pretty much it. We never see her interact with Asuka, who's supposed to be her BFF. I was hoping that this was going to be highlighted somewhere in the act, but it didn't, so it was a pretty obvious missed opportunity. Also, the most forced character ever was put here. What is exactly the role of Hikari's dad in this act? Only grumping around and being an ass? I was very confused by this forgettable character that had no role whatsoever. Is he an Easter egg of sorts or a cheap reference to someone? I don't know, just let me know in the comments if you know. We are also introduced to a new organization named Credit in this act by Toji, which is the one in charge of supplying the village with basic goods in order to survive. This is yet another faction that never gets developed, and is used to let us know that Village 3 is not the only village around, as they do work as an independent organization under Wily's supervision. It would have been nice to see other villages, at least glimpses of them in the movie, just for world building. But they didn't. Again, Evangelion feels like a small world, being Anima the exception. Eventually, we are revealed that Misato had a son named Kaji, whose only purpose in the film is to expand Misato as a character on her motivations and on why she did not go with Kaji to die during the third impact, as she at the time was pregnant. We are going to talk more about that when we get to Misato, but her son as a character was wasted, in my opinion. Another missed opportunity. So let's talk about Reikyu. Tentative name Rei Ayanami had a beautiful arc. One that wasn't original, but one in which she learns about the world, human interactions, and more importantly, motherhood. Although it seems different, the essence of the act lacks of originality, as I said on my previous video, but is wonderfully executed. An iconic moment of the film. Also, her story in the first act of the film compensated her lack of development in the previous movie. I was truly enjoying her portrayal in a very slow and tedious act, one of the few things that I can rescue from the beginning of the movie. However, the creative changes on the motivations on how Reikyu died are at least questionable, and in my opinion insulting. The whole reasoning for her death was to Shinji definitely wake up and take a stand. That's it. A Shinji that did not understood what Rei is, and his relationship with this particular Rei was merely superficial, just because she reminded him of a previous Rei. He had absolutely no connection with Reikyu, so he spends 30 or so minutes into the film sobbing about Kaoru, but when Reikyu dies, he just snaps out of it. I'm sorry, but that is just weak. They just needed to move the plot from that endless act, in my opinion. And it feels that it was the only way they could find to do it. And to be even more insulting, they force a sequence in which this Rei cried in a very similar way that Rei 2 cried in episode 23 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. One of the most beautiful episodes in the story, and that is why I hated every second of it. Now, I am not going to go over why she needed an LCL tank to keep her body stable, as for this movie retcons many of the established lore, that the reason of Rei losing her form was because Gendo Ikari sabotaged her. So in theory, this particular Rei, which we already revealed to be number 6, which could be a reference to Yamashita's anima, where there are 3 more Reis after Rei 3, could have avoided her demise if she was properly calibrated. I don't believe this Rei knew that she was malfunctioning, as for she clearly realizes this when she sees it with her own eyes. Thus, giving the weak argument that Gendo wanted to Shinji feel this Rei, to whom again he had no connection whatsoever, the same way he felt when he lost Yui. Furthermore, there is a clear reference to the end of Evangelion, turning the character that was turning everyone into LCL, and the only one that did not melt, the first one to do so in the film. Anno waited more than 20 years to tell this joke, so he gets a 10 for patience, but I think it would have been classier to have one of these headless failures break into the village and squash Reikyu exploding as a bag of meat and one of her eyes hitting Shinji's face, and thus actually establishing a legit threat to the village. By the way, Reikyu had a cross flying over her just like every other angel in this timeline, but again Kaoru didn't in Q, just to let you know. Now that I got most of the things that I didn't like out of the way, let's start the part of the review in which I am more positive about it. I will be critical though, so bear that in mind. When we reach to the Wonder in the second act, we are quickly revealed that not everything seems under control, as for some of the crew members are bothered from some decisions that Misato took in the past regarding Shinji. In this particular sequence, we are let know that Midori is very upset about the decision. And the focus of the character in here makes very clear that something was going on in her mind. That will later play out in the movie, so it wasn't very subtle, but obvious. Sakura Suzuhara was also upset and placed in a very obvious reference to Neon Genesis Evangelion episode 16. That is Leliel's episode, with the difference being Sakura replacing Misato, but Asuka playing almost the same role. That was a nice touch. So, Misato is losing respect in some of her crew members, and a decided Shinji is now in the ship. Misato and Shinji relationship in the new theatrical edition was better developed than the one with Asuka. As for in the first movie, Misato is one of the 3 main characters. After that, she just kind of vanishes in the background, to the point that in Q, we really don't know the new Misato. The only glimpse being that she hesitates on trigger the DSS choker at the end of the first act, which was used to tell the audience that after all we saw, this is still deep down the same Misato. She historically has been Shinji's mother/sister/lover, but now that role has been diminished only to a mother-like figure, and it's very clear that loves immensely. The whole Shinji-Misato relationship for me as a Misato fan was very important, and I was hoping for a satisfiable resolution to their story. And I'm happy to report that satisfied I am. I was particularly moved and really felt the love and respect between these two characters in the sequence when they are talking to one another after she was shot and ends up with them hugging each other. That was fantastic. Communication, remember? A constant theme in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and always make a strong emphasis about when talking on Shinji and Misato relationship. Mainly because Misato doesn't know how to communicate with Shinji, and that is the reason behind the whole grown-up kid sequence in the end of Evangelion. I recently made a video about it that you can find in the description section below. Misato's character development in Rebuild fell short overall. This is not a study based on Carl Jung's Neo-Freudian psychology of the Electra complex, which I have made several videos about that you can find in my channel. Nevertheless, for a compressed story, Misato's main features were highlighted properly in my opinion. Her relationship with her father has always been important for her persona, as he was the one who saved her by giving his life, after a life of hating him for replacing his wife and daughter with his work. It is revealed, however, in 3+1 that Dr. Katsuragi had a more prevalent role in the story, being the author of the proposal for the Human Instrumentality Project. Now this is a huge retcon to the original lore, and probably the reason why we stopped seeing Misato wearing her father's memento both in Q and Thrice Upon a Time. In my opinion, sometime during the time skip, she found out about this and stopped wearing it, feeling betrayed, and replaced it with Kaji's armband. After all, she did break up with Kaji originally because he reminded her of her father. Now it is very clear to her that both are very different men. So, Misato again protected Shinji from a bullet using her body and sacrificed herself to give Shinji a shot to save humankind, yet again dying in an explosion, referencing both the end of Evangelion and the manga. My girl can simply have a happy ending. Only heroic ones. What a badass she is. Finally, I want to make a quick mention on Ritsuko. Dr. Akagi this time around shot first. Now this is hilarious and clever. And of course they are referencing the end of Evangelion scene in which her mother quote-unquote betrayed her and let Gendo shoot her even though she could have done it first. This sequence is the only one in the entire story in which Dr. Akagi shines, and I love it. Overall, her portrayal is not very different from the original one. She's still the voice of reasoning and Misato's closest friend, leading her throughout the movie. Misato trusting her is so big that it entitles her with the leadership role of Wily before dying. I am glad that even though Misato didn't survive the story again, at least Ritsuko did, and now she is left with a new purpose, the one to rebuild. That was fantastic. Now we can move the focus on Mari. This character became a fan favorite without having an arc for years, thus it was important for her legacy to get one this time around. And she did get a very complex one that is going to be subject of discussions and speculations for years to come. Her portrayal overall was pretty consistent with the previous two movies she appeared on. She's the joyful bouncing boobs anime girl with hidden motives. I did like her overall. It was very fun to watch and a radical change on the traditional character portrayal of Evangelion. So obviously Anno decided to portray his wife through this character. That is the main reason why we got the ending we got, and I'm going to address that later on this video. This is important to know to better understand the character. Mari's first introduction to the story was in the second movie, where she fought the third angel in the Bethany base. Mary of Bethany is a biblical figure that is also identified as Mary Magdalene, the woman that in the Bible helped Jesus to bear the cross. Yet again in this movie we are revealed that Mary's true last name is referenced to our biblical one, Maria of Iscariot, making a clear reference to Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed Christ. So these two references tell us that Mary has a very important role to the resolution of this story. Mary will fulfill a role of ultimate companion to Shinji and a traitor to her former acquaintances. Now, you can take however you like all this religious connotation, I'm just presenting evidence after all, It's always up to you to decide. But the fact is that Mari had a crucial role in the development of the story overall. We were also confirmed that Mari was older than Asuka, something that was teased in previous movies, by her addiction to LCL. This is done through Gendo's background, that by the way it plays out almost the same to Sadamoto's manga. It has its differences though. In the manga, Mari is more reserved and is quite jealous of Yui. She's also older there, 16, with a 16-year-old body. But the reference is so obvious that it even plays in black and white in the movie. Did Mari de-age since those events? Or she was already taking LCL back then? That is subject for discussion and speculations. Overall, Mari had a solid portrayal in my opinion. I really enjoyed watching her in this movie. Asuka's portrayal in contrast had many problems. Not only in the movie itself, but across the whole reveal timeline. We are revealed early in the first act that she uses a DSS choker just like Shinji did in the previous movie. I did a video last year explaining these chokers. She also references to the inhabitants of the village as Lilims, something that she does for the first time ever. So at that point we already hinted that something is not quite right with this Asuka. Her portrayal on the first act was very solid in my opinion. Hard to watch and impactful, and to be honest, for me the best Asuka in the whole reveal timeline. Yes, she is very tough on Shinji. We know she's been carrying a grudge for 14 years. But at the same time, she cares about him. Wearing a scarf to hide the choker after seeing Shinji's reaction to it. Following him around after he leaves Kensuke's place just to make sure he's okay. And sending him food with Reikyu. And she understands very well that she has to fulfill a role of a bad guy. Because of the inaction and passiveness from everyone surrounding Shinji in the first act. Also, she's the only one that doesn't try to convince Shinji to stay in the village. I am going to address the Shinji-Asuka relationship more in a bit, but first I have to talk about her relationship with Ken. After watching it for the first time, I felt it was very ambiguous. The way they become so close to each other didn't feel natural to me. After all, they are very different characters. My first assumption was that because of Shinji not being around for all these years, Asuka decided to move on with Kensuke. I mean, Shinji was believed to be dead. The girl had the right to move on, right? And Kensuke is the only familiar character that we have left that doesn't have a purpose overall. So it felt forced to me putting Asuka closer to him. It was convenient in my opinion. I mean, better him than a random dude, I guess. And then Kensuke starts to grow up and started to lose interest in a 14-year-old girl body, and then assumed the paternal figure. So that was my overall feeling after watching the movie for the first time. Then, after reading the interview that Yoko Miyamura gave to New Type, it was clear to me that the Asuka-Kensuke relationship was exclusively a father-daughter one. She did make a lot of emphasis on that. So basically Kensuke replaced Kaji on that role from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Overall, I don't know how to feel about it to be honest. I never liked that relationship between Kaji and Asuka in the original story, and I was relieved that this was scrapped in the reveal timeline. But still, it doesn't feel right to me. So I am leaning towards disliking this relationship. It felt forced and unnatural in my opinion. There's nothing else that I can say about it. Returning to the Asuka-Shinji relationship, this particular portrayal will go down as one of the most embarrassing things in the Reveal legacy. Not only Asuka was never properly developed as she was in Neon Genesis Evangelion, but it felt like a real slap in the face to fans in general and Asuka fans in particular. And still Kara has the nerve to use Asuka as a marketing tool to attract new audiences. It is simply unforgivable in my opinion. And on his team are so self-aware of this lack of development that they highlighted on her dialogue how they based the entire relationship on a bento box and a 14-year-old grudge. What the heck was in that box? Love potion? An aphrodisiac of sorts? It is very insulting to the audience, and to tell you the truth, if this girl was to be replaced by another random one to fulfill the same role, most of us wouldn't care the least about that relationship. It's just based out of nostalgia, that's it, ever since the second movie. And yes, yet again Asuka gets choked. She was twice in the end of Evangelion, and yet again twice in the Reveal timeline. In the end of Evangelion it had a meaning. The first time Asuka gets choked is when Shinji decides that he had enough and starts instrumentality. So basically there, Asuka represents humanity. The second time she gets choked is on the beach. Shinji was confused if all of the scenario was real and doubted that she was alive. Even more, he doesn't know if he was alive. I will go over that again in my End of Evangelion series when I get there, but it was very powerful and memorable. In Reveal, yet again, feels convenient and forgettable. How many people even notice the parallelism? We are also told more on her background. This is where I lost interest overall. Asuka being a clone diminishes not only her legacy but also race. As for now, we have multiple series. They are not unique anymore. It seems to me that the whole intention was to throw mud on Asuka, so audiences felt less attached to her. Well, if that was the purpose, it worked out perfectly for me. Shikinami Asuka, I don't know how to put it. Well, let's go with cringe, as most of her portrayal overall. Finally, the beach scene, which is obviously a reference to the End of Evangelion. Now this time Shinji is not choking her, but telling her that he liked her. He decided to give her the body she yearns since episode 8 in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and that was beautiful. What an amazing creative decision that was. Very memorable moment, even if we don't feel attached to this Asuka, because the feels, the nostalgia outweighs it. My only objection with this sequence is that Shinji doesn't directly ask Asuka what she wants. He just makes a decision by reliving her past experiences through instrumentality. But Asuka's reaction let us know that there is more to her feelings that she actually reveals to Shinji. Without letting her to speak her mind for one last time, he sends her back to Kensuke. Now all of this seems less selfish once we are revealed that Shinji was to sacrifice himself and he was trying to give everyone a happy ending from his own perception, a one without him. Nevertheless, it would have been more powerful if Asuka would have had a few more lines in this sequence with Shinji, but that is just my opinion. Hey you ready for fan theory? Yes? Then let's put our tinfoil hats together and revisit one of the silliest theories regarding Asuka ever developed. Do you remember that theory that some people in the fandom suggested back in the day, proposing that Mari is in fact Asuka's mother? Well, do you? I certainly do. After all, I've been giving a lot of crap to that theory for years. Well, today I will tell you that there is at least 4 pieces of evidence that may suggest that this little silly theory could in fact be true. So I'm going to try to debunk myself today. Ready? Here I go. The first evidence that I'm presenting is probably the most obvious one. In Reveal Q and Thrice Upon a Time, Mari and Asuka seem to have a very intimate relationship, calling each other by pet names. In Mari's case, she addresses to Asuka as Princess, and sometimes as Your Highness, just like a mother would do to her daughter. And for the rest of the story, she cares way too much for Asuka. So I know that this is not enough to convince you, but from here things start to get really weird. The second evidence that I'm presenting today comes from the Kensuke-Asuka relationship. As I expressed before, this relationship is one of a father and daughter, right? Right. And it is established that every time she's in the village, she stays with Kensuke, right? Right. In other words, with her father, right? Well, who does she stays with in the Wonder? Mari. Her mother, perhaps? Okay, let me present to you evidence number 3. During Asuka's background sequence, it was established that she actually saw the Ikari family as a child in Europe. We are later revealed in the story that Mari already knew Gendo and Yui before ever meeting each other. Also, it was established that this Asuka didn't have a father, and her mother was never around, which could explain Asuka's coldness towards Mari. Also, how Gendo was very well aware of the Shikinami series. This suggests that Gendo made Rei and the Yanami series with a similar procedure he learned from the Shikinami series. But who was in charge of the Shikinami series? Who was eager for knowledge and experimentation? Well, that is Mari. So yes, I am suggesting that there is some evidence that leads to this conclusion, and that Asuka is to marry what Rey is to Gendo, her creator, thus her mother. The fourth and final piece of evidence that I'm proposing comes from the source of this old theory, and this is Sadamoto's manga. Back when released, the extra chapter of the manga, in which tells a background story of Yui, Gendo, Kozo, and Mari in college, it is the source of this particular fan theory, as that Mari leaves to Europe by the end of it. Now, one of the most iconic scenes on the manga is this one. A joyful Yui Kari tending to the hair of a grumpy Mari. A very similar scene in 3+1 takes place in which a joyful Mari is tending to a grumpy Asuka's hair. Am I insane? Does any of this make sense to you? Did I just debunk myself and prepare the field for this silly dead theory to reemerge? I don't know, man, just let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now back to the review. Let's talk about action sequences. Now this is something that the movie seems to have a lot, but at the same time is one of the less impactful aspects of the film, with Mari and Asuka getting most of these sequences. The only real memorable one is the one with Unit 13 confronting Unit 1, that it comes with a very poor CG. It completely pulled me out of the movie. The movie does have some good CG though, but when we get here it's so bad to the point that feels intentional, and I know that many people agree on that. This will be followed by a very poorly designed Lilith with a two-dimensional hair. I don't know what led to this creative decision, but it was hideous. The lack of action scenes with poor pacing was a huge letdown. All this in contrast to the perfectly executed battle between Unit 2 and the MPEs in the end of Evangelion, one of the most legendary sequences ever. Now, to be honest, Evangelion is not about action anymore. It was long time ago, and Yamashita's anime is full of it, but I was not expecting a very memorable mecha fight. And the only one that is kind of decent is Unit 13 versus Unit 1. That, by the way, ends up with a draw. And the whole motivation is that Shinji is having problems communicating with his dad. I can't believe that for a movie from a franchise which takes so much pride in its so iconic mechas, this didn't have an epic battle sequence in the final movie. Yet again, another missed opportunity. Gendo Ikari finally gets his complete background. I did mention on my no spoilers review how the only background that we had from Gendo came from episode 21 in Neon Genesis Evangelion. That, by the way, in that episode which Yui co-stars, they are only seen together in the same frame in a picture. It always felt weird to me. Anyways, this time around we get a more polished arc, in which we witness a tragic story of a lonely man that finds joy in life by meeting her beloved Yui, and couldn't bear to lose her to the point that he will bring the end of the world just to hold her on his arms for one last time. That was poetic. And the way that ultimately plays out for Gendo, it brought me joy, and have to recognize that together with Asuka's beach scene and Misato's last hug with Shinji, this was one of those wow moments that made me tear up. And that it is basically. Once you are in a journey with all these characters for years and dedicate hours to this story, it is difficult not to feel it. A perfect reminder that Hideki Anno, with all his flaws, when he completely dedicates to it, is an outstanding storyteller. Moving away from it and focusing a bit more in the plot overall, we are revealed what it is the biggest and most important plot twist that absolutely changed everything in all of the Evangelion timelines, and that is that the story is a loop. Now, for years we have been teased with this idea, and to be fair, Hideki Anno did hint it in the past at least a couple of times, but was never established as a fact. Now it is, and the way they used to explain it was with a huge info dump about an existence of an anti-universe and a Black Lilith, in which Gendo will use to bring him to a world similar to that of the end of Evangelion, in which he will take the role of Shinji. So the whole idea behind it seems extremely convenient to me. as we have never been teased with any of these things for more than 20 years. And even though it's fascinating to say the least, it feels like it's something they pull out of their butts just to move the story to where they want it to be. Another thing that feels pretty convenient is the Spear of Cassius. The whole spear thing with this inclusion added to Cassius is just a mess. I wasn't convinced by any of the arguments. Now it turns out that humanity can create spears on the go. It just retcons all of the established lore and symbolism, and its impact is huge to all of the storylines. Now, I am not blaming this movie for all these convenient choices. After all, the main goal of this particular movie was to end the story. And in my opinion, they did the best they could do with the problems they inherit. So, any of these creative choices has an impact on my overall rating, because at least in this movie, they did try to close multiple plot holes. And talking about convenient, we have to address the Book of Life. Another thing they pull out of their butts. Now, this involves Kaoru. As for whoever appears in the Book of Life with him, it will be destined to be together forever. That is at least the basic understanding of it. So now Kaoru's legacy is altered, as it seems that his whole feelings and relationship to Shinji was bounded by a mystical book that could conveniently change depending on whose name is in it. This is not true in its entirety, but it's the general feeling to it. Now, Kaoru has always been very special to the story, ever since his debut in episode 24. So this reveal also feels like another slap in the face, this time to Kaoru's fans. A lot of people got slapped in this movie, to be honest. I wasn't expecting Kaoru to have much screen time this time around. After all, he got almost all of the previous movie for himself and Shinji. We are also revealed that he was buddy-buddy with Kaji during the time skip, that they barely addressed throughout the movie. Probably because Anno has already teased a possible comeback in the future to tell that story. What he has revealed so far is that after the events of the near third impact, Gendo and Kozo went on the run, and Seal assigned Kaoru as NERV new commander and Kaji as vice commander. However, when Kaji went to sacrifice himself, Wily as an organization overtook NERV, as we can see from this scene. Kaji sacrificed himself during those events. After all that, Shinji gives them a happy ending together. This time returning to a world that it seems like Misato is alive from my understanding, and together tend to his watermelons. By the way, Shinji does let Kaoru speak this time around, in contrast to Asuka. Then we have long-hair Rei. We knew that Rei survived the near third impact, but we didn't know about her whereabouts. It is revealed that she was still within Unit 1, and Shinji was expecting to find her there. Now, I would have loved to see more about this Rei, and even more with Rei Q and the other 3 Reis from the Ayanami series together and interacting with each other. Her participation is very limited, so there is barely nothing I can add other than it is established that she kind of has some recollection of her other selves, because by holding the weird doll, it may be an indication of Rei Q's feelings towards Hikari's newborn, and how she would have loved to be a mother as well. After all, she is Yui's clone, who is very much a mother. After that, she accepts to live in a world without Evas, in which she can be whatever she wants to be. Let's address the ending. That, by the way, is very similar to the previous 2 endings, both episode 26, that now is canon, and the end of Evangelion. In episode 26, Shinji was also in black and white before finding his ideal world. And the end of Evangelion also ends on the beach. This time around he ends up with Mary in her Little Mermaid mode and her original pair of glasses, which is hilarious. This is all about closing a cycle. You see, Neon Genesis Evangelion starts off with blue waters and ends up with a red one. In Reveal is the opposite. It starts off with red waters in the first movie and ends up with blue ones. So at the end, Shinji does find happiness with Mary. And after getting all these facts together, for me it's a very positive ending to the story. And I liked it overall. A bit too much anti-Evangelion in my opinion, but very much an end to a cycle. Finally, we get the epilogue of the story. Here is where people focus more about. I try not to think about it too much because for me the movie already ended in the beach, and this is only the epilogue. So I'm going to leave others that feel stronger about it to analyze it. Nevertheless, here's my take on it. I see here a farewell letter from Anno to his audience. in which he says it's time to leave Eva behind and spend more time with his wife in the real world. And so should you. Which, by the way, is a very similar message to that of episode 26. Also a reference to Sadamoto's epilogue, in which he also ends the story in a train station. In that occasion, Shinji finds Asuka again. So that's it. That's my review of the movie. I think I covered almost everything. I know that there are certain things I left out. That is because I either haven't made my mind yet or I just completely overlooked it. Thus, this takes us on my final rating for the film. Now, I do watch a lot of anime, and I have made a ton of reviews in both my channel and my Discord, so I'm going to abide for the same rules. In my opinion, this movie overall is very strong. I know I did not mention the OST at all, and I barely spoke about the animation. I did mention them, however, on my previous video, and both of these features also have value. You can have the best story in the world, but if that doesn't come with a good presentation, I am sorry, your product just doesn't work for me. This movie did have an outstanding OST and a fabulous two-dimensional animation. I also have to take into consideration that most of this movie's flaws, plot-wise, were inherited from previous movies, as I mentioned before, and I do recognize that the film did try its best to address these problems, at least most of them, and that also has value. Nevertheless, Anno's self-insertion into this particular story is way too shameless, and even worse now that he brings his wife with him. Also, some of the creative choices, especially regarding the first act, cannot simply just get a pass. So, by taking all these into account, as far as I'm concerned, Evangelion Thrice Upon a Time is an 8 out of 10. Now, I did give the first one a 9 out of 10, and the reason is that it's just like the first 6 episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion, but reanimated. So that 9 was an easy one. They did not have to work a lot for it. The other two movies I gave them a 7, which means above average. But overall, I do feel that the second one is the weakest one, but still a 7. Thus, 3 plus 1 is the best revealed movie that has an original story. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I publish Evangelion and other anime content each week. If you don't want to miss the next video, be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell notification button. If you have already but you still feel that you are missing on the notification, consider to follow me on Twitter @MixSans or join my Discord for free, where I provide daily updates on the channel, Evangelion news, and current and classic anime insights and discussions. You will find the link in the description section down below. Guys, thank you all so much for watching, and as always I wish you all a wonderful day.